So today we are very happy to host Kelly Swain, who's originally from North Carolina. Sorry for that. Came to Ecuador more than 30 years ago as a Fulbright scholar, specifically to teach for 1 year at the Universidad San Francisco de Quito. A torrid love affair with the diverse nature of this South American country made it impossible to leave. Teaching field courses during all that time, from the high Andes to the Amazon and Galapagos, has provided some unusual long-term perspective for many iconic neotropical ecosystems. As founder of the full semester Boston University Tropical Ecology Program, which ran for 25 years and 47 cycles until the pandemic, Kelly has spent extended periods immersed in Ecuador's nature with small groups of students and has helped to form many fervent conservationists and professional ecologists. In the position of founding director of the Tiputini BioDiversity Station for over a quarter century, he has had nearly endless opportunities to interact with and learn from researchers from many areas of specialization. Sorry about that. Whether providing information for curious novices, enthusiastic undergraduates, driven graduate students, and collaborating scientists, or relating tales of the tropical wilds to documentary producers, nature magazines, or international news outlets, he has always seen sharing wonders of Yasuni as both a unique privilege and a happy crusade for the cause of nature. So thank you, Kelly, and I'm looking forward for your presentation.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity. And I really hope that more stations, more contacts in the OBFS will do the same thing, and so that we can get to know the various sites even better. Yeah, as you said, I've been in Ecuador a long time, and I've been here just absolutely cherishing all the moments I have in contact with so many species over across so many different ecosystems. But the one that I'm here to talk about today is the Amazon rainforest. The Tiputini Biodiversity Station is located in eastern Ecuador. Let's see if my screen's going to change here. Yes. Basically, I chose the land for the station back in 1994 on the Tiputini River. That's why it has that name. This is within the Yasuni Biosphere Reserve. And it turns out, as we've been documenting, quantifying the number of species here, as best we can tell, this is likely the most species diverse part of the planet. Of course, we haven't been able to identify and list everything that's here, because it's still estimated that something like 85% of the insects don't have scientific names. So it's an ongoing process, but the vertebrates we know much better than that. So here's an aerial view of the station there on the right, and you can see where we are in the little map on the left there, the northern boundary of the Yasuni National Park and the Yasuni Biosphere Reserve. Actually, we're inside the buffer zone of the Biosphere Reserve, but actually just outside the border of the national park. So kind of a technicality there as to our relation to the political boundaries of the Yasuni. We have a camp that has most of the basic facilities, pretty big lab building, about 600 square meters, divided up in 2 floors. And there are office spaces, classroom spaces, lab spaces, those kind of things. We don't have lots of sophisticated lab equipment, but we are a field station, and so we expect to do more things out in the forest as opposed to in the lab setting. And we can receive as many as about 40 students in the housing like you see there, very comfortable, but pretty basic. And we can also accommodate at least 20 scientists. There's some areas that's more for professors, professional scientists, and then there's another area that's more for graduate students. Okay, so yeah, we have three axes of action, and they are investigation, education, and conservation. We kind of turned that into, an everyday vernacular by saying study, share, save. The idea is that the more you know, the more you share that information, the more likely you can actually save things. We are stewards of about 700 hectares. We don't actually own that land, but we have an agreement with the Ecuadorian government that has gone on for, 25 years, the first cycle, and now we've signed an agreement for another 30 years. So we're here to stay. We receive somewhere between 600 and 900 student visitors per year. Before the pandemic, it was in the 800s most years. Since the pandemic, obviously that's gone down quite a bit, but we're recovering relatively quickly. So that's good news for us. Oh, I would point out that all the photos that are in this slideshow are mine, so I don't have to give credit to anybody else and just have to give credit to the wonderful nature that's available for photographing. So yeah, a big part of our cash flow really comes from student groups. And so we're out there to show a new generation why these kinds of places are worth keeping. And so that's our message really through the young scientists toward the world is that Yasuni is a special place, not in the exclusion of other places, obviously. There are dozens of scientists who come through the station, and I've only put a few here, but some years we have certain individuals, especially like John Blake, who spends months at the station every year now for almost 20 years, and other scientists who show up for like a long weekend, and they have a very specific topic, and they do a bit of research, and then they're gone. But depends on the specialization. One of the papers that we were involved in, more than a decade ago now, is this one, and really arguing for keeping places like Yasuni, especially good representation of Western Amazonian kinds of refuges. We're in the process of developing an update for this same kind of article by obviously in the last, this article came out in 2010. So obviously in the last decade or so, we've learned more. And so now we think we can beef up the arguments here for doing more to keep this part of the world. And now and again, when we get a chance to express our opinions in other venues, not just in scientific articles, that happened to come out in Nature several years ago. But once again, expressing the idea that this place is a little too special just to kind of sit back and let it decline. One of the things that we do at the station is a big camera trap program that's been going now, I think, for 17 years. Well over 500,000 photos. And I think now we have something like 30,000 videos of fauna as well. Just an extremely productive project for us. And it's also resulted in many, many publications looking at everything from densities, relative abundance, schedules of activity for different organisms, competing groups, and those kind of things. Another thing we've done over the years, we've published several books, some for passing a message along to the general public about Yasuni. Others that are specifically, this one in the middle here, Los Secretos del Yasuni, it was specifically published to pass along scientific information to local people, colonos, indigenous groups, in language that, in Spanish, but in everyday language that makes it accessible. And so I'm really proud of that. The German government actually sponsored this, and we ended up passing out thousands of copies of this book that has field guides and all kinds of things incorporated into it, as well as some results of scientific research to indigenous communities. And we didn't just send the books, we went to those communities that talked about the significance of their role in conservation. And so we're very involved with our indigenous neighbors as well. And then the other book there about the water courses in eastern Ecuador, from the highlands all the way down into the lowland rainforest areas. It's also a really important contribution to our understanding of this area. Several years ago, we were basically the site for the development of one of the longest articles I've ever seen in National Geographic, I think, but about the significance of Yasuni once again. And this article is definitely worth going back and flipping through your old National Geographics. Most of the photos at this site were taken, or most of the photos in this article were taken at our site. The ones that weren't taken there are basically the ones depicting indigenous life and also depicting things like oil spills and other kinds of impacts on the region. So I did want to actually give you some numbers for what can be seen in eastern Ecuador. And so these are numbers that we've been able to quantify, and I'll point out that some are a little more in the category of estimates as opposed to documented. But with the trees, we're pretty good with this. Yeah, 600 species of trees. So woody plants that, in this case, are at least have a DBH of at least 1 centimeter. And up to gigantic trees like the one that's in the photo there. Oh, by the way, that tree is, the root to the left there is taller than I can reach, certainly. So, like 2.5 meters or so, that root, and so they extend out to the sides, probably like 8 meters or so before they go down to just regular roots on the surface. The region of Yasuni has about 2,200 species of trees. And so, yeah, this comment there of being similar to US and Canada combined, that's 1 hectare versus 1 continent, basically. So somewhere around there, 600 species, I think, is a good estimate for those two very large countries versus this area, like I said, of I think 3 million hectares. So very different kind of scale here. So this is like, Yasuni is about the size of, one of the smallest states in the US. So yeah, another one of these big numbers that just really shocks me still is 100,000 species of insects per hectare. And that is, and once again, that's pretty similar to the best estimates for the total for the US and Canada for all arthropods, right? 100,000. So 1 hectare versus 1 continent, or nearly so, right? Or the temperate part of 1 continent. And sometimes when I say 100,000 species of insects, I get the response of, you really mean 100,000 individuals, right? No, if we do individuals, we're talking about several billion. It really is 100,000 different kinds of insects that we're talking about here. And of course, here is where we are really estimating. But you may know about the work that Terry Irwin has done over the years. He spent at least several weeks at our site collecting over the last probably 50 years of his life. And so he really is the insect guru as far as species diversity is concerned. And he had has collaborators, like hundreds of collaborators around the world, who confirm that, yeah, there's far more species to be identified, but the number probably is somewhere up there around 100,000 species per hectare. I wanted to show you just a few insects, because we are doing some developing some photographic guides to even these massive groups that can't possibly be completely covered. But we're still giving it a try. In our first edition of this kind of field guide, we want to include around 1,000 species, but very representative of the various groups of insects, kind of at the order and major family groups, that kind of idea. And extrapolating out across the region, yeah, best estimate is probably 1 million species in all of Yasuni. So if we develop a field guide to for 1,000 species out of 1 million, it's actually pretty pathetic, and we recognize that. But you know, most of the insects are so small that most people would never notice them. As you can see there, most insects, literally more than half, are actually less than 3 millimeters in length, according to those massive fumigations that Terry Irwin did over the years in our region. So they're the kinds of things that none of us would ever even notice when we're in the forest. So a field guide obviously would deal with things that kind of start at 1 centimeter and bigger, right? Okay, so let's see. Yeah, now to the vertebrates. We're revising our fish species list. I'm a fish specialist. As far as my graduate career is concerned, I've done a lot of other things since that. But, you know, we used to say, okay, there's probably about 400 species of fishes in Eastern Ecuador. And then we started saying, you know, as we started really in the last year and a half, we've really delved into the taxonomy here. And we're now thinking that the number, I actually have documented more like 600 species. Individuals who have looked at the molecular evidence for our region, as far as fish are concerned, they're saying, yeah, we're probably going to end up with over 700 species for Yasuni or for Eastern Ecuador. By the way, the US and Canada together have about 800 species of freshwater fishes. Amphibians, yeah, just kind of off the scale for frogs, big numbers of reptiles, mammals, and birds. Also, it depends, you know, if you expand out a little bit on the regional scale, you have over species of birds. So yeah, a gigantic number of vertebrates altogether. I want to just look at each one of those groups a little bit here. Yeah, so the US and Canada together have a little bit less than 100 species of frogs. Yasuni has about 150 species of frogs. So you can see yeah, the kind of comparison there once again. With the reptiles, you know, there's some living in the trees, on the ground, underground, in the water. So every major group of reptiles is well represented here. Even the crocodilians, we have 3 species right in the waters right around the station. Yeah, with almost 600 species of birds in the area, and around 800 species for the US and Canada together. You can see the proportions there. And once again, birds kind of do everything you can think of in Yasuni. There's some really fantastic species. It's a great place for bird watchers. Not a lot of the first 25 years of our stewardship, we were actually prohibited by the government to do any tourism where we are. Now, with our renewed agreement with the Ministry of the Environment, we're actually encouraged to do tourism, ecotourism, you know, like bird watching specifically. And of course, the pandemic came along about the time we were thinking about promoting that. So we haven't done that yet, but that's kind of one of our next steps. There are 5 species of felines at our site. And according to what we've been able to do with the camera trapping project, it looks like jaguars and ocelots are particularly well represented. At our site, pumas and jaguarundis are quite rare. They really don't show up much in the camera traps. Margay cats are somewhat intermediate in our camera traps. 185 species of mammals, 2 species of sloths. That's the 3-toed sloth there. But bats are more than half of all the mammals. And of course, most scientists are saying, yeah, the number will probably exceed 100. Some species that are active above the canopy are very difficult to access. 10 species of monkeys. There's a spider, squirrel, and woolly monkeys on the screen there. They're all 2 of those. 2 of our 10 species of monkeys are actually endemic, kind of to the greater Yasuni region, but the one on the right doesn't even make it out of the country of Ecuador. It doesn't make it north of the Napo River. The one on the left it extends out into a little bit of Brazil and a little bit of northern Peru. So here's a couple of maps that just kind of depict this concentration of species diversity in the western part of Amazonia or the Andean foothills, and we're right in this section where that elevational transition meets the equatorial line, and so all the maps that are drawn or developed like this to depict diversity concentrations, like for mammals on the left, birds on the right. You can do this for trees, you can do this for butterflies, and you get the same kinds of things. So it's a very stereotypic map for the continent of South America. But this once again confirms this idea that, okay, there may be 1 million species within Yasuni, but if we look at the entirety of this crescent in kind of eastern Colombia, eastern Ecuador, eastern Peru, we probably are talking about 1.5 million species altogether of everything, plants and animals. And so this also gives us a hint that, remember that the best estimates for world diversity is somewhere around 8 or 9 million species of macroscopic things. And so that means that Yasuni could be home for 10 to 15% of all species, marine, terrestrial, everything, right? Which means that we have this great opportunity. And I know the title of this presentation was originally something like Conservation Opportunities in Yasuni. And so we think that Yasuni probably does represent one of the best opportunities for keeping a tremendous number of species. I did want to point out that this is a very complex part of the world. And so the challenges are great. It's not just about the species. There are many other complicating factors here. And one of those is oil extraction. We don't have any oil wells right beside our operation, but there are oil wells out there at 20 kilometers away. And of course, that's very concerning because there's always pressure to expand those oil operations to make more money for the government, obviously. This area is also coincides with indigenous territories that can be very positive, but it can also cause some conflicts when we especially if we get a little bit in between oil and indigenous people, and there's some confusion about who are these outsiders, and okay, you guys are doing something good. What are you guys doing over here? That kind of thing is always a potential complication. But in general, we have really good relationships with our indigenous neighbors. Some of the area to the south, like 70, 80 kilometers south of where we are, has been designated as an absolute reserve for the peoples living in voluntary isolation, those people that we tend to refer to as uncontacted. But they really do represent a special case as far as human rights concerns are part of the landscape here. Also, there is a national park here, and we try to help national park through different kinds of efforts as well. But there's a lot of different kinds of things that have to fit together to make this place have some real potential to survive, for indigenous cultures, for our station, for all that species diversity as well. So yeah, here's a couple of photos of some Waorani friends. The Yasuni basically coincides with where the Waorani have lived for somewhere between hundreds and thousands of years. Of course, as one more oil road is built, that implies that there's more pressure put onto these people to be incorporated into another society, and that in turn means that they tend to lose their cultural integrity. It depends on what groups. There's a couple of clans that are called the Tagairi and the Taromenani, who are still hiding out there and have essentially no contact with the outside. Basically kill anyone who goes into their areas. They do have some interaction with their cousins who are contacted, like the two individuals that are in, or the three individuals in these photos here. But they really have decided to maintain their separation from modern people and from those oil operations too that keep pushing deeper into their territories. Okay, so part of what we do is we try to interact in a very positive way with the Ministry of the Environment and the Yasuni National Park. We do serve as a guard post. We're kind of in the middle of nowhere, and like most national parks in Latin America, there's a real budgetary crisis basically, and they can't afford to put guards everywhere, and so. And we're happy to be part of, the monitoring and the eyes in the forest, so to speak. And we do, by default, travel up and down this river, which also happens to be the border of the park. But we travel up and down this river just for logistical reasons on a fairly regular basis. Certainly not more than once or twice a week, but we can serve as eyes in the forest, at least in this area. And of course, we are one of the main sources of information about the park for diversity, what's going on there, how the forest works, those kind of things. The Católica University also has a station about 25 kilometers to the west of us. And they're actually on an oil road. So it's a little bit of a comparison of moderate impact area to almost no impact area where we are. So we have this nice comparative potential for collaboration between the two stations. So a little bit of summary here. What do we do? Once again, our axes of action, like I started off here. Education is a part of that, investigation and conservation. Those are the big major goals of what we do, but we're also involved in just keeping an eye on the region and trying to get the word out about the special things about this place. Another thing that we do is, because we're associated with the university, we actually have developed a scholarship program for indigenous students. And so basically any indigenous student from across the entire country of Ecuador can study at USFQ, the parent institution, almost for free. This program started with just indigenous people of Yasuni because they were our neighbors or in the region of the Tiputini station. But over the years, the university has expanded that to basically be available for all indigenous students of the entire country. And the last thing, we do, lots of scientists kind of keep this hands-off kind of perspective, but we really want to be involved in pushing for the conservation of this area. And so we try to participate with newspapers, magazines, documentaries, news outlets, all those kind of things. Once again, to try to finish off here before we get to a few questions, there are three main factors that really should independently justify keeping Yasuni. One of those is what I've mostly been talking about here, and that is that there's just more species here per square kilometer than anywhere else. Another is that there are uncontacted people living here, and that means that anytime we move into the areas that they occupy, we are depriving them of a UN guaranteed right for all of humanity, and that is the right to self-determination. And so if we don't allow them to live their lives, if we don't allow them to make choices about what their lives are for the future, then we are absolutely violating one of the most basic of human rights. Another thing is that you may all recognize that Ecuador's constitution gave rights to nature back in 2008. And of course, just because something is written in a constitution or occurs in the laws, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily enforced. And so we're still trying to push toward Ecuador's constitution being completely respected, especially in those sections that deal with nature's rights. Because the Constitution really does use language like guaranteeing evolutionary processes in Yasuni, right? And so that implies a long-term kind of commitment. Yeah, and so here to finish off here, this is our question. Are we doing enough at Tiputini? Like I mentioned, we are in a place where there are other kinds of pressures, especially oil. And the forest over huge tracts of land really does look to be intact. But here's our major concern. In the last decade, we've started to be able to document, to quantify the declines of some groups. And that is especially true of understory birds. It's also true of peccaries, leaf litter amphibians, and certain insect groups. We haven't been able to follow all the insect groups, obviously, but for a few select groups we have been following since about 2008 or so. There's some pretty serious decline. And you know, the question here is that we really are kind of in the middle of nowhere. There are impacts, you know, at a distance, but they're not right there in our neighborhood. So our question is, what is going on? And of course, if somebody comes to the station and they're only there once and they only stay for a short time, this is still a fantastic experience as far as fauna is concerned. You can still see those 10 species of monkeys. If you're there for a week, you'll probably see a tapir. You're absolutely guaranteed to see pink river dolphins almost every time you go out on the river. Capybara here or there, jaguar now and again. There's a full complement of parrots, and of course butterflies can be just absolutely abundant. So some things seem to be suffering, some things seem to be doing just fine. And the problem with that is that, okay, we can't pinpoint who to blame. And that is one of the major problems of what we're trying to do with our analysis of data as far as weather is concerned, as far, you know, so climate tends to be one of those things that we complain about, as well as some other global kinds of impacts, but we're still working on this. And certainly if someone in the audience today has a great suggestion, we'd love to hear it, and we'd love to collaborate as well with other places that might be seeing some of the same parallel kinds of losses in other parts of the world. I'm going to stop there because I know I've gone a little longer than I should have, but I'll definitely invite some comments. I see there are some comments in the chat. Let's see. Looks like it's mostly people coming and going.
No questions yet.
Yeah, okay.
So folks want to add a question. These photos are amazing, Kelly. Just wow.
Yeah. Well, it's an amazing place. You know, it's one of those things, you know, if you're at the ready and you know, you're out there a lot, then you get these great opportunities. And there are certainly individuals who, and I don't have a long lens, but there are individuals who've spent a lot of time at the station who have long lenses, who have, you know, just crazy photos of birds and especially primates. It's and also jaguars. Jaguars come out onto the beaches along the Tiputini in dry season, and sometimes just kind of lounge there. It's it really is a fantastic spot to have access to fauna. And way back there in the middle of this slideshow, I had a slide with 3 book covers on it. The one book cover that had a puma face on it, that book is mostly photos from that were made by Pete Oxford, who is a professional wildlife photographer. And he has, in the book, there are several photos of a black jaguar, a melanistic individual. And it's one of those cases where, nobody ever sees a black jaguar. And that's also true at our site. But the story, he was out on the river with one of our guides, a Quechua guide, and they saw this black jaguar and it immediately disappeared into the forest. And they were just so disappointed. They were celebrating on one side, disappointed on the other side. But this jaguar just cut through the forest and came out on the next beach. And they came around this corner and saw this thing again. And of course, they were just kind of standing there with their mouths agape. And this jaguar stayed out on the beach for an hour and a half and actually took a nap. And Pete, the photographer, said that at some point, he's like, okay, I already have like 500 or 600 shots in my camera. And now this animal is just going to sleep. It's kind of like, I want to throw a stick at it or something. So it'll move, or it'll wiggle its ear or something, so I can get a different shot or a different angle. But what a great thing to be able to complain about, right?
Absolutely. So Philippe has a question that I think is better done. He's saying it's a bit long. So Philippe, please ask your question.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, Philippe.
Oh, Kelly, I'm just sorry I arrived late, unfortunately.
No problem.
It's good to see you, even if it is only virtually. My question, so the point you bring up about the decline in taxa is a really important point, and it touches on a question that I've thought about several times over the years, and so I'm curious to hear your perspective on it. And it came to mind because several years ago I was at the Colanzo Chalupas Preserve over in Ecuador, and I remember that one of the things that I was told was that in 1 hectare of that rainforest where we were standing, there are more species of trees than there are in all of North America. And
that's right.
That just blew me away.
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
It is.
And there's so many of those parallels where you have basically the 1 hectare versus 1 continent kind of proportions.
I know. It was very hard for me to grapple with. But then that raised the issue that you touch on, which is so if we want to understand declines in these taxa, how do you even begin to decide what to look at in order to figure out what the factors are that are driving these dramatic fluctuations that appear to be happening in the last decade? It seemed almost intractable to me in a situation where the diversity is so high that I don't even know how researchers would begin to decide what to look at. And so
that is the question, right?
Right. And so I'm wondering how the researchers you interact with approach that issue, because I find that, I'm a desert rat. And when you're in the desert, it's really easy to sort of begin to bound and identify what the factors are, because there are ways to manage it. But I can't for the life of me figure out how you do it in a situation like that.
That part of this is also, I think, about luck, because once you start to see some decline, you can kind of say, well, a decade ago, I think there were more of these things. So we have to be lucky and happen upon data sets that actually include something from back there or started way back when, or that kind of stuff, and then you can actually document these trends. But there are some groups that are obviously charismatic and people are going to be looking at them. And so it's not a surprise that we know something about, the large mammals or the large species of birds. But the other things, it really is kind of hit or miss. And when I put a few things here, like the understory birds and the peccaries and the leaf litter amphibians, it's kind of okay. Luckily, we have some data sets that go with those groups, and we can actually make a graph. But with many things, it really is more like, yeah, I think it was different. It's kind of like one of those conversations with your grandpa, right? It's there, it used to be easy to hunt around here, and then you could come down. It's that idea of the shifting baselines. But another place that I really have to start mining is that from very early along in our history, I insisted with our head guide, who was always just fantastic with birds, that he keep a journal of sightings starting back there in the mid 1990s. That guide has recently retired. But we have, something like 15 years of his records of sightings, and that includes extremely rare sightings and those kind of things. So, like I said, this is going to be something that's going to require a tremendous amount of sorting through, establishing Excel sheets and looking at the trends, because that's one of the things. I happen to be one of the individuals that's looking at a couple specific groups of insects. And what I've seen there is that the species that were rare, 10 years ago have now essentially disappeared. The species that were common 10 years ago are now quite rare. And so I really want to see what we can find out looking at these records of bird sightings, and try to get a handle on what may have happened to rare species versus common species. Because John Blake has been doing lots of trapping. He actually has thousands of birds banded in a couple of segments of our forest, and he has absolutely documented this decline in the understory bird community. And so we want to, but with trapping, with sightings and being able to identify individuals with those bands, but we want to be able to see if on the broader scale, some of the, and not just with forest interior species, but we want to see on a broader scale if we can get some trend associated with common species, rare species over time.
So as you're talking, a thought came to mind, but let me just also say, you can't imagine how unsatisfying being lucky is as a strategy.
It's horrible. It's useless.
That doesn't cut it for me. But here's a thought: almost all the species of significance in the southwestern deserts are derived from tropical ancestors.
Yeah.
Present. And so I'm wondering, from an evolutionary perspective, if it might be productive to look at the species at risk in these southwestern deserts that are related to already existing ancestors in tropical rainforests.
Yeah, kind of those lineages.
Yeah, to look at those lineages as a way of maybe, how should I put it, shortcutting the lucky aspect of it, and thinking in terms of that being an indicator of where to start studying, also because then it gives regional connections to other areas as well. Yeah. So that's just one thing that occurred to me as you were talking, because almost every significant species, whether you're talking about creosote bush or Joshua tree or the neotropical migrants that come here every year, they have ancestors are all where you are, and so that might be the way to try cut through
that's a very interesting point. And an old student of mine from the Boston program is actually now a premier category plant biogeographer. He's German. He works at a university in Germany, but he's done so much kind of at the world level, and with things with island biogeography of plants. That we should probably have a conversation with Holger Kreft at some point in the near future, because that is intriguing. This aspect of the of
sounds
the
like
plant
somebody in the Humboldt
lineages
tradition
in particular. I'm sorry.
I said it sounds like somebody coming out of the Humboldt tradition.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Cool. In any case, thanks. I'm just sorry I missed the first part of it.
It's great to see you again, Philippe.
And it's been recorded, and we'll make it available, Philippe. So you
great. Okay, good.
We'll send a link as part of the follow-up. Great. There was another. Oh.
No, please, Rhonda, go.
I was just going to say, Robin posted in the chat, he's envious of the number of student visitors you have. What's the secret that brings them in, Kelly?
I always say it's me. No, I think it is. Once again, there's a bit of happenstance here. I think it is a little bit of luck with having good contacts with universities in the U.S. Or that was very important early along. Another part of the story that may have been very positive early along was that one of the members of our founding team, really, Carol Walton, is an ecotourist, bird guide who subsequently has gone on to have her own business. Actually, people just about every part of the world now. She takes people to places from Alaska to Antarctica, from Galapagos to Zimbabwe. That kind of person. But she's an extremely dynamic person. She was connected. She was also Ted Parker's wife. And so, she had connections with the ornithology community, and the ornithology community had connections with the bird watching community and scientists in general. And so she really was a key part of getting us started early along. But then, my connections with Boston University, and then the networking out from there across other universities was extremely important. The connections with the Universidad de San Francisco de Quito, this university is a liberal arts university, which is very unusual for Latin America. Most universities have a different kind of focus, but because of the way, the USFQ is only, it was founded in 1988, right? So it's just, a little more than 30, are we 35 this year, right? But it was basically, this new kind of approach to education. And so because of some international connection, and because almost all the founders of the university had studied in the US, they had those connections back there. But because of the style of education that's offered here in the international programs, USFQ came to be called kind of the sweetheart of US universities. And so, they could send their students here, and they could take the same kinds of courses that would fit in with the curricula back at their home institutions. And so the university typically has over 500 students from the US and Europe every semester. And so a huge proportion of those students automatically want to go to rainforest. And because the university has a site where we can do that, we have this conduit that is just fantastically efficient with getting lots of people flowing through our station. It doesn't mean that they're all biology or ecology focused individuals, but I do believe almost anybody who's 20 years of age who comes to Latin America, to a country like Ecuador or Brazil, you got to go out and see the rainforest. And if you have some way to make a connection between a university and a field site, then that needs to be developed. And I think it's only logical, and it's also good business for the university itself that's trying to make one of these field stations actually function. You can kind of just plug into that and just say, oh, the international programs are offering this course in this place, or at least a brief outing to a certain field station or that kind of thing. I think this is about making the most of your connections and even kind of leveraging those kinds of connections, especially when there is this kind of parent institution associated with a field station. And almost all field stations are connected with something, whether it's an NGO or a university or whatever, right?
Yeah, I like to follow up with that, Kelly, because you seem to have very good relationships with your parent institution, and also, would you say that each student of San Francisco de Quito know of Tiputini, or is that, what's the proportion, and how to make sure that you know, no student gets left behind and has the opportunity to go to
Yeah,
Tiputini?
well, I would tend to say that every student who studies at USFQ, whether they're Ecuadorian or Brazilian or Argentinian or Mexican or from the US, they all hear about Tiputini probably in their very first orientation to the university. You know, something that's really great is that the administrators of the university and the recruiters for students at the university are very aware that the Tiputini Biodiversity Station is truly, you know, a feather in the cap of this university. They do see it as a very positive part of the institution, but it is hard to keep that in people's minds because we are 300 kilometers away from Quito, and so we need reminders. And you know, over the years, we do poster sessions, and we have some parts of the university where there are photos of fantastic fauna and those kind of things. And as the university has evolved, the biology department has come to be bigger, more respected because of more and more kinds of publications. The biology department is also connected with a field station in Galapagos. And so this university, USFQ, by having a well-established field station in Western Amazonia, in Yasuni, and another field station, which can't really be called a field station. There's a campus there. It's you know, with modern facilities, all concrete and that kind of stuff, not like the bamboo houses that we have at Tiputini. But the facilities in Galapagos, and they're connected to the UNC Chapel Hill University. And so those connections associated with one university makes the university and those two field stations even more attractive. And so from an international perspective, we're doing great. Unfortunately, inside Ecuador, you know, when we talk about like undergrads or graduate students doing research, most of them tend to go to Galapagos as opposed to studying in Yasuni. It's just, you know, Galapagos is just too sexy to ignore for a lot of people. But, you know, Galapagos does get a lot of people into the country, and then, you know, then they might notice Yasuni and Tiputini. But I really do, you know, I am a real believer in getting the message out and doing all we can to let people know about it. And we just need to do it more. And that's true for all the field stations in the world, right? And that, of course, that's part of what we want to do with OBFS, is to get more people on board, more involved, more engaged, and bring attention to everybody's you know, assets, no matter where you happen to be. If it's in this place so special, or it's in, you know, 10 miles from your house and there's this fantastic little park. It could be a state park or a city park. But like I always tell people, yeah, okay, I can show you lots of numbers here, but I'm absolutely certain that no matter where you live, there is something that's absolutely fantastic just basically outside your city, and maybe even even inside a municipal park, if it's got some greenery, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you for this. We're out of time. I had one more question in the chat, but we're technically only supposed to go an hour. So for those who need to go, I don't know, Kelly, what your schedule is, but
well, I can continue, but I mean, if people need to leave, they can bail out. I won't feel offended. but yeah, we can definitely answer a couple more questions, or I can ramble on about a couple more questions. I hope that's not what it seems to be.
Not at all. Mine is that you mentioned having these great relationships with the local community, and sometimes you're between the oil interests, the local community. I was hoping you could speak a little bit to how that was established, how trust was built.
Well, that is kind of a slow process, and part of it had to do with the fact that I already had a little bit of experience in Eastern Ecuador, and I already had some interactions with different indigenous groups. Most of my early experience was in contact with Quechua speakers. And so I already had some friendships on that side, but on the Waorani side was much more difficult. It's a group that's only been contacted for a few decades. And so they are rightfully quite wary of outsiders and untrusting, and I understand that. But I was some of my first experiences in Yasuni, I was actually hired to do some environmental impact studies for an oil company, and so because of that, I was put into contact with Waorani very early along, even before we started trying to choose a site for the station. And so I was able to develop some friendships there too, but not many. And so over time, it was very difficult to separate, one group of outsiders from another group of outsiders for the Waorani. They kind of saw all of us as, these people who are probably going to disrupt their lives. And of course, on one side, you had the oil company that tended to offer them just tremendous gifts, things like canoes and outboard motors and all the fuel they could use, and and shotguns, and just kind of on and on. Of course, as a field station with essentially no budget at the beginning, we couldn't do that. We couldn't compete with that. So we had to have some conversations through individuals who were bilingual, obviously, but offering other things that a university can offer, things like education, things like other opportunities for employment at the station itself, in the form of being guides or other kinds of things. And of course, the idea there is that, wow, you guys have a lifetime or, all of the history of your culture experience that you could share with visitors, with students at our site. And so by appreciating what they did have to offer and fitting them in so that there's some benefit to the indigenous individuals was also important. And for the younger generations, they were instantly interested in this opportunity to study in a formal way. And so we don't just have scholarships for the university level, because those would be essentially unobtainable for the vast majority of students. So we actually sponsor students even at the high school level so that they can be prepared and can actually become, college students at some point reasonably. Right. But early along, we were offering everything from, housing and food and medicine and all kinds of stuff in Quito for getting some students to Quito. And obviously it was very difficult because most of these indigenous students, their parents don't speak any Spanish. And so we go from, in one generation, from completely separated from the modern Ecuador to being immersed in, what most people would say, the elite university of this country, or even the elitist university in this country, in the capital city with maybe one, and we always tried to have at least one or two students together so they could at least communicate in their own language at least part of the day. But there's a lot of challenges with that, and it's a matter of patience and persistence. But it's also very easy to offend somebody along the way and to kind of do the situation of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 3 steps forward, 5 steps back, and then you kind of patch up things and go ahead. But in general, I would say we have had very positive interactions with Indigenous people. Easier on the Quechua side because they've been in contact with outsiders for hundreds of years. More challenging on the side of the Waorani. But still, now, nowadays, it really is, we've been there for almost 30 years as Tiputini. The youngsters who were there when I was first started, now, they're like in their 20s or so. And they remember, this gringo that showed up and this and that, and they would interact with me, and I would play with them, like kick a ball around or something back there. And so they kind of see me as, the kind of this uncle that shows up now and again. It's like, oh yeah, I know that guy. And so there's this other personal kind of connection as opposed to trying to be institutional versus individual or family. I think that, the personal connection is absolutely key to these kinds of relationships.
I feel like we just scratched the surface on that one because I have
absolutely.
But we are out of time. If anyone has more questions, we've got folks' email addresses, and we'll follow up with a form and email addresses so we can keep the conversation going.
Perfect.
Yeah. Unless there's anything, does anyone else want to add anything or ask anything?
I have lots of questions, but I think we'll
right.
we'll let
go
this
for
come
like
to an
3
end.
more hours.
Same here, but thank you so much. I think it's been really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Good.
So I'll put a little.
I'll ask Philippe when he's going to be back in Ecuador.
Oh God, you have no idea how much I'd like to go, but right now, yeah, I'm getting ready for. My wife is going in for surgery, so we got several months before we get to do anything.
Sorry to hear that. All the best to her.
My hope is to have everything settled by August when our son gets married, and September when OBFS meets.
Yeah,
great.
I was going to do a quick OBFS plug for the September OBFS conference and meeting, September 12th through 17th. I think I've got the dates right, in Costa Rica this year.
Yep.
Very good.
Hopefully we'll see everyone there face to face.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.